So reload or rebuild. That's exactly where the Bulldogs find themselves here in 2025. Welcome into another edition of the How About That DawgsCast, and I am happy to be back in the chair. And tonight, I preface this conversation by asking the question, or rather making the statement, that 98% of Georgia Bulldog fans, they are not going to believe what I have to say tonight. And that is that the University of Georgia is entering into a rebuilding season in 2025. I know. That doesn't mean that the Dogs are going to go 6-6. It doesn't mean that they're going to go 7-5. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just going to drill down a little bit on the difference between those two words and what it means, because there's a lot of flux in Athens as spring practice opens up this week. So it's going to be really, really interesting because they're going to have to sort out some key positions all across the roster. Now, most Georgia fans are going to look at me and think I'm nuts if I tell you that they're going to be entering a rebuilding year. They're going to blame me and tell me that I'm like Nolan Smith. Everybody predicted you were going to go 7-5. I'm not saying that. But I'm saying that tonight we're going to take a look at the schedule. We're going to take a look at what the Dogs have to sort out. And, I'm just going to sort of maybe recalibrate how we should go into 2025. Because one thing's for certain, it doesn't mean it has to be bad, but it definitely is going to be different between the hedges for the Georgia Bulldogs, Kirby Smart, and we, Dog Nation, here in 2025. So it's finally here. I know that the team has been working on the 2025 season since 2 weeks after the Sugar Bowl. I understand that. But for all of us, for the average Georgia Bulldog fan, things don't really get cranked up. They don't come back in front of us so we can see them and get daily reports until spring practice. So that's where we are. We're getting this thing underway. The Dogs are back out there in shorts and helmets the first couple of days, acclimation, but they're starting to get together, do some teamwork. The coaches actually see them. Kirby's on the grass with them. And, we're going to start to hear news and updates and reports and this, that, and the other, and knock wood and fingers crossed that everybody gets through spring and we don't have any crazy injuries pop up. Because according to Kirby, in his presser this week to open up spring practice, he said that on the whole, he thinks that he feels pretty good about where Georgia is physically heading into spring practice. Like how many people are actually going to be available to get those very, very valuable spring practice reps. So if we're going to talk about the 25 season, we may as well just take a second and walk through the schedule, because it's going to look very, very much like the 24 season, except you're going to notice that there's no Clemson off the top. They're not opening with a big inter-conference game, right, against a Power 5 opponent here. They're opening against Marshall. Now, I mean no disrespect to Marshall, but that should be a game that Georgia should be able to go out there. And, yeah, Marshall's going to be feistier than maybe some people are going to expect him to be. I'm calling it now. But Georgia, even with all their new pieces and new faces and new places, should still be able to go out there and get this win to start the season. Then they're going to have Austin Peay, and we have a pretty good idea of how that's going to go. But then we're going to jump right into SEC play. Now, Tennessee's going to hit us in September. They usually don't come to Athens, or we don't go to Rocky Top until late October, early November. So that's a little bit different. Then Alabama's coming in. And, most people seem to think that Alabama squad's probably looking at a double-digit win season, or at least they better be. So that Alabama team's going to be a good team coming into Athens. Then you're going to have Kentucky, Auburn, the litany, the same schedule that they played last year, except we just flipped it home and away, right? So now if you have season tickets in Athens, you're going to get to see Alabama. You're going to get to see Kentucky, Ole Miss. You're going to get to see Texas down the line. And, of course, they always have to go to Jacksonville and face what seems to be a Florida Gators team that's on the upswing. If nothing else, the thing the Gators can say that not really anybody else inside the conference can say is that they know who their starting quarterback's going to be, and they really have a good handle on what he's going to be able to give them. Now, Garrett Nussmeier can say the same thing at LSU, but for the majority of the conference, that's not the case. We're breaking in new quarterbacks. I mean, we as Georgia fans, we know Gunnar Stockton. We're familiar with his game. We saw him play in the Sugar Bowl. but he didn't have several starts last year, and he certainly didn't get to play in a lot of mop-up duty time because the Dogs just simply didn't have that kind of season. So in fairness, you have to throw Georgia in that lot with teams that don't really know what they're going to get from the quarterback position. So it's going to be a challenging schedule. And then, of course, you finish with Georgia Tech. This year, it would have been on the road. It's not on a true road game scenario this year. They're going to be playing at the Dome. But needless to say, that Georgia Tech team is also improving, and that's a tough way, an interesting way, a challenging, dangerous way to finish the season. So we've gone through the schedule. We've talked about spring. Let's get into what actually is going to shake out this year, because Kirby Smart, more than anything else, has said repeatedly that his favorite thing. Now, listen, if you're getting paid the way Kirby Smart's getting paid, okay, it's okay to enjoy your job or enjoy every part of your job, or at least make sure that when you show up that you're doing a good job, right? But we're all humans, and we all have the things that we appreciate the most, the things that we consider to be our favorite things. And for Kirby Smart, that's being on the grass and actually coaching technique in football. During the regular season, he's always coaching, but I don't know how much he actually gets to do that kind of thing where he gets in there hands-on and gets it done. I'm not privy to practice right now. I don't know. But in spring, there's no limitation. He can get right in there, coach technique, and it sort of takes him back to his days as a coordinator and a position coach. So we know Kirby loves this time of year, and it's good because the Dogs have a lot that they're going to have to work on this year, a lot that they're going to have to straighten out and get organized. And that's really going to start with one of the things that I think everybody, even if you just have a cursory knowledge of the Georgia Bulldogs and the football program, you're going to know that they've lost a lot of talent to the NFL draft, to the transfer portal, and to graduation over the last few years off of the defensive line. So when we're talking about some of the areas that they have to take care of, we're talking about that defensive line. And there are faces there. There are bodies. Georgia recruited well along the defensive line over the last couple of cycles. The thing is, we don't really know those players. There have been a couple that have flashed and have gotten on the field, but much like Gunnar Stockton, they haven't had the opportunity to get a lot of reps because the Dogs simply haven't been in those type games. So there are bodies there, but they're unproven. And the coaches seem to think that they're going to be good football players, but we as fans don't know them yet. So I can think of a couple of different names that maybe played a little bit last season, but then didn't get to finish out the year because of injury or, like I said, situations in games they didn't get to play. So when the Dogs line up to play defensive line this year, they're going to be looking at a lot of new faces and a lot of young faces, because when you recruit players like Elijah Griffin, who was the number one rated defensive lineman in the country in this past recruiting class, who is built already coming in to be able to play the position, you have high hopes that maybe he's going to have an opportunity to see the field early. So don't be surprised if that happens for Georgia. So we don't know them. They're talented, but they're going to have to show us. They're going to have to show us exactly who and what they are. One of the other positions that everybody really wants to talk about this offseason has been the offensive line, and with good reason. They underperformed last year. I'll have more to say on that specifically in another video down the road. But the thing is, regardless of why it happened, the way Georgia ran the football in 2024 and the way that offensive line played is not indicative of the program that Kirby Smart wants to run at the University of Georgia. Ernest Green was someone who started last season as a starter at one of the tackle positions, wound up getting hurt, and then that was just the story of the year, not just for him, but for everybody, because they had a lot of injuries across that line that we didn't even learn about until after the season that guys were trying to play through. But it's no excuse. And Kirby Smart and the coaching staff will be the first to tell you that. They are supposed to have players ready to roll in. So at some point, it became execution. I read that as coaching, or players weren't focused the way they were supposed to be. Regardless of what it was, they didn't get the job done. So that's an area that everybody wants to point to, ask about, and really scrutinize here as we head into spring practice. Another area would be the wide receiver position. We all know Georgia led all of college football in 2024 in dropped passes. It also seemed like, it felt like they led all of college football in 2024 in attrition at the position. And part of that was due to what happened with Colby Young. He burst onto the scene as an NIL transfer coming in last season, had a nice touchdown reception against Clemson, and then they were trying to get him into the offense. He never really found his stride, and then some things happened off the field, and he is no longer available for Georgia. Turns out now, according to Kirby Smart, he is cleared heading into spring, and he is practicing with the team. He's been doing everything that the team's been doing this entire offseason. But as I said in my press conference reaction video, and if you haven't seen it, I think you might ought to go back and check it out. But I'll mention it again here. Until Kirby Smart looks into the camera and tells me that Colby Young is going to line up and play game 1 against Marshall for Georgia, I'm just not going to buy it. I'm just pumping the brakes on it. Everything sounds good. The trajectory is good. It looks like he's going to be available. But until I see Kirby Smart do that, I am not putting my eggs in those baskets. So the wide receivers, whether it's Colby Young or Nitro Tuggle or the transfer portal players, Zachariah Branch or Noah Thomas, or is it Sokovie White or any of the other myriad of players out there who Georgia thinks can be playmakers for them, they're going to have to step up and show us that it's going to be different than it was in 24, that they're actually going to be able to catch the ball when it's thrown to them, that they're actually going to put in effort, real, serious, meaningful effort in the run game out on the perimeter as a blocker. These are the things that you have to do if you're going to play wide receiver at Georgia. The ball will come your way. You will have opportunities to make plays. When they come, you have to make them. Georgia failed at that in 2024 for the most part. So that's a big question, another area that everybody wants to look at heading into spring practice in Athens. But old Kirby and me, he's looking at everything. But that's what he's getting paid to do. I have the luxury of being a little bit more particular about where I want to put my attention. So we've already mentioned defensive line is going to be new. The entire front seven for the Dawgs is virtually new. And how that defense plays is going to have a lot to do with how that front seven comes along. The offensive line has to be better. The wide receiving core has to be better. But there are other things that I think I want to take a deeper dive into as we look at spring practice.
Have you ever wondered why Kirby Smart is considered one of the top coaches in college football? Why he builds his programs the way he does, and why he's been so successful? It's because he's adapted the teachings of some of the best philosophical and strategic minds the world has ever known. These are lessons that help you be successful not only on the football field, but also in life. If you're interested in learning some of those secrets for yourself, the key is to help you change your life and better understand what makes Kirby tick. Good news is I've already done all the work for you. Just sign up for the Ring the Bell newsletter below and I'll send you my curated list absolutely free. And you can start to unlock the keys to help you dominate life the way Kirby Smart and his Georgia Bulldogs dominate college football. Get it today.
The area I really want to pay attention to, or at least one of them, is the most obvious to some people's eyes, and that would be the quarterback competition. I've already had people asking me, is this actually going to be a competition, or is Gunnar Stockton going to be the starter? Listen, Gunnar started the Sugar Bowl for a reason. He's the guy that the team felt gave them the best opportunity to win. He's the guy that's been in the program the longest. He's the guy who has whatever level of experience that was to be had, he had it. That's why he got the start against Notre Dame in the Sugar Bowl. That doesn't mean that he is going to be anointed the starter for the 2025 season. In fact, I would take the position that that absolutely cannot happen. They cannot walk out there and hand the ball to Gunnar and tell him that he is the starter heading into 2025. Georgia is about competition. That has to apply to the quarterback room just like everywhere else, especially when you're coming off a series of years where it seemed to be predetermined who was going to be QB1 at the University of Georgia. That is not the situation right now, and it cannot play out that way. Kirby Smart and Mike Bobo have to make this a real competition. They have to let Gunnar Stockton and Ryan Puglisi get out there, work it out on the grass, and then may the best man win. Let that guy be the guy that leads Georgia against Marshall in game one. I would really love it if we got into fall camp and there was actually some question about who the starter was going to be. We all know Kirby plays things close to the vest, so I don't expect he's going to tell any of us anything anytime soon anyway. But I would love to be able to believe that Ryan Puglisi has been able to come along enough to where he can at least push Gunner for some real competition, some competitive snaps as we get into those scrimmages in the fall camp, so that there is at least some question who the number one might be, because if nothing else, that's going to make Ryan Puglisi better. That was one of the things that worked against Gunner last year, because he didn't have the opportunity to get any meaningful reps as the number 2 quarterback before he had to take over in the SEC championship game and then start in the Sugar Bowl. So he had to go out there. It was all new for him under the brightest lights on the biggest stage. Now, granted, he didn't get a lot of help in that game, and that wound up being one of the most embarrassing Georgia losses that I've experienced in the last few years. A little disrespect, I guess, to Notre Dame in that statement. But the bottom line was, it wasn't because of Gunner Stockton. So he did a good job. He's got a leg up, and he's moving into spring as the presumed leader. But it's important that Puglisi understands that he's one play away, and he needs to take advantage of every rep he can get, spring, offseason, and then fall camp leading into the season. And hopefully he can push Gunner every step of the way, because it's only going to make both of them better. If we take a look at what our friends over at UGA Sports had to say about Gunner Stockton here heading into the season, you can see his numbers there. He's a junior, 6'1", 215, big boy. He has a lot of skills. He's patiently waited his turn, and everybody thinks that now he's the guy. But it's going to be important that Mike Bobo and Kirby figure out exactly, with all these new moving pieces on offense, the offensive line, the wide receivers, they're going to have to figure out what works best to give Gunner the best opportunity to be successful if he turns out to be the number one guy. The thing about Puglisi that I want to mention here is that he's not a statue. He is not a Carson Beck back there, not that Carson was an absolute statue, but he mostly was. And now you have a guy in Puglisi who can actually run the ball a little bit. He can move a little bit better than Carson did. I don't know that he runs it maybe quite as often or as much or as well as Gunner Stockton did in high school, but we know that Ryan can run. But make no mistake, he's a passing first guy. He wants to be in the pocket, and he wants to use his big arm, which he has shown off. And frankly, that's one of the things that gives him an opportunity to actually have a chance to win the job here in 2025, is that he seems to be picking things up quickly, and he has all the physical tools to be a starter in the SEC. So again, let's go back and look at what the guys over at UGA Sports have to say about it. He didn't see any freshman action as a freshman, but he looks like he could be a good quarterback, and he's going to get plenty of work. So the very least, he's going to be putting himself in position to be a ready-to-go number 2 quarterback for Georgia. And if he can put pressure on Gunner to end up being the number 1 guy, in my humble opinion, that's only good for everybody involved. So that's the quarterback position, but it's not the only position I want to pay attention to. I think one of the other positions, and it's a little sexy, I'll admit it, just like quarterback is, that I love to pay attention to is that edge position, because I love to see a defense get after the quarterback, and I really get giddy when I see that you can do it without bringing extra men, right? Because that means you can keep guys on the back end, you can cover up all the passing lanes, and then you can still get pressure on the quarterback with your front 4 or 5, whatever it turns out to be. Damon Wilson hurt my feelings. Going into last season, I thought it was going to be a huge year for him. As it turned out, it wasn't as huge as I had thought it might be, but he did have big plays in big games, and I thought he was poised and ready to get out there and really explode for Georgia here in 2025. But he decided that he had had enough training, enough development here, and he's going to go to another place so that maybe he feels like he can get more statistics than he might have gotten here, which again doesn't make sense to me. He was in position here to be Georgia's number 1 pass rusher, and they would have schemed it up much like they did for Jalen Walker this year to make sure that he got home. But that's enough. I'm not crying over Damon. He's gone, and I moved on. The thing that I'm looking at now are these young players that are going to have to take over at edge, and they are going to be green. All we have to do is take a look at who they expect is going to take over the primary roles for Georgia in this position, and that's going to be Gabe Harris. Now, Gabe has been in the program for a couple of years. He's played. He's shown flashes of being able to do some real things. But is he that guy that's going to be a terror off the edge? I don't know that he is, but he might surprise me. One thing's for sure is he's going to have an opportunity to show us all. You can see his numbers here. He's 6'4", 260, plenty big enough, lots of reach. He's played, but again, he hasn't flashed in maybe the way we thought he would in a role where his only job was when he was in the game to spell the other guys and come in there fully revved up and ready to get after the quarterback. So I'm hoping that with a little bit more clarity on his role, knowing that they're counting on him to be the man, Gabe's going to come in and be able to do a good job for Georgia this year off the edge. The other guy that we know we should see this year is Quintavious Johnson. Now, Q is a little bit of an enigma. Now, if you look at the UGA report here, the UGA Sports report, he played in 12 of 14 games last year, mostly on special teams, but he did make 4 tackles. The thing that keeps bubbling up about Q is that, yeah, he's young, but look out, because he's scary physical. Like he's got a twitch. Like he's the kind of athlete that, well, let me just start this way. When the kid was in high school down at Mays, the thing about him is that he was clearly the best player on the field virtually every time he stepped out there. So much so that, yes, he played defense. Yes, he played linebacker, defensive end, wherever they needed to put him. But he was such a great athlete that they would put him at quarterback and just snap the ball to him and let him run away and run over everybody he was playing to give Mays the best opportunity to win. That's who we're talking about here with this guy. So is he a pass rusher? Yes. Does he have speed? Yes. Does he have the physical build to make it happen? Sure does. Let's take a look at his numbers. 6'4", 255. So he's right there with Gabe Harris, except he runs a little bit better than Gabe Harris, except his twitch is a little bit better than Gabe Harris. But he's young. He's going to have to learn all those skills that it takes to be an effective pass rusher. More than one move, right? Learn how to drop, bend your hips, turn that edge. There's a lot that you have to know to be an effective pass rusher, and that's where Q's going to have to learn. But he's going to have the opportunity to show us. He's going to have the opportunity to get out there and let us all know that he, in fact, is that guy. Man, Georgia sure needs him to be. If nothing else, I'm going to be really, really interested in just watching the physical specimen that is Quintavious Johnson get out there and learn as he plays. It could be a boom or bust thing with him. Like, as a young player, he's going to be out of position at times, even if he's coached to the very best of the coach's ability. It's going to happen because he's young and he's inexperienced. But it could be a situation where when he's on the field, he might end up making plays just because he's such a great athlete. He makes a great play even though he's out of position. Like it's not even his job, but he ends up making a big play in the game. So that could be the situation with Q this year. I, for one, I'm kind of here for it because, again, I love that position and I really want to see what Georgia can do out there on the edge. But they're not alone. There are more edge players, but they are even younger. We're talking true freshmen here. And the 3 that jump off the page at you are the 5-star Isaiah Gibson, 6'4", 255. He's a young man who everybody thinks has the physical ability to come in and play right now. Physical ability as well as the skill set that he's shown while he was in high school. That he's going to be able to come out there and make an impact right now, much like Joseph Jonah Ajonye did last year before he got hurt. Sometimes there are just, again, physical specimens who are built different than the rest of us. 1% humans who have the ability to show up and play day one. Isaiah Gibson is one of those guys. Elijah Griffin along the defensive line is another one of those guys. But Gibson isn't the only guy that's a true freshman here who has a good build and may be able to see the field here in 25 for the Dogs. Darren Akinabon is another young man from New Jersey who is very long, huge wingspan, great speed, has the physical tools to get it done as a pass rusher. How quickly will it come together for him? How quickly will he be able to see the field defensively? We're just going to have to wait and see. Chase Linton is another one who they think he could be a really big deal as a pass rusher someday. Is that going to be in 2025? I don't know. But that's the thing. We can't know. We can't know until these guys get out there and begin to work and show us what they have. But one thing's for sure, Georgia is young at that edge position. And that young defensive line is going to have to pair with this young edge group to hold up for Georgia if they're going to have any chance of having a good season the way we would define a good season, which is a 10-win season, another trip to the college football playoff. Can they do it? There's no doubt that this unit is very, very talented. That's not what's up for discussion here. It comes back to all of those intangibles, though. It comes back to whether or not these guys can bring it all together quickly enough and just exactly how much they're going to be relied on to get it done. Which brings me back to where I started this conversation. Is it a rebuilding year in Athens for the Georgia Bulldogs, or is it more of a reloading year? It depends on which metric you want to go by here in the preseason, because we can't know the answer to that question until the season is over. Then we'll have the one-loss record in front of us, and we'll know how many of these young men were actually able to play constructive and useful minutes for the Dogs here in 2025. When I look at it and just go by the definitions of the word, Georgia has lost over the last few years first rounder after first rounder at every level of that defense. If we're speaking about defense specifically, then we would have to say that these young players, as great as they may end up being, with the exception of one or two here or there, they're just not what we think Jalen Carter was as a freshman, where he demanded to be on the field. And we all know what he did as a sophomore and junior. But he was on the field as a freshman. And he's just one name, right, that I'm throwing out there. There have been others, and all those dudes went on to get drafted very, very high in the NFL and are now playing on Sundays. So are these guys that kind of player? We don't know. Maybe Isaiah Gibson, maybe Elijah Griffin, just to name a couple. We saw KJ Bolden last year. He played a lot as a true freshman, eventually essentially taking over as a starting safety for the Dogs. So we know that Georgia still recruits at a very high level. We know that Kirby Smart and that coaching staff are out there trying to get the very best players they can get, regardless of where they are in the country. We know that Georgia's going to go into the season as one of the top 5 rosters easily in college football. But there is so much inexperience on the team. I think I would be doing you a disservice, and I would not be being genuine in my opinion of this team if I looked you in the eye and said, yes, we're going to believe the recruiting rankings and only the recruiting rankings, and I'm telling you this is a reloading year for Georgia. I can't do that. I can't do that because I can't look at this group and say there is a Jalen Carter type player. There are great players in this recruiting class. I think they're going to be great Georgia Bulldogs. I just don't know that they're that right now. So if you lose a player like a Jalen Walker, and then you don't have a Jalen Walker caliber player to put right there in place of him, which right now the Dogs don't, or if they do, you and I don't know about it. If you can't plug and play one for one, then it can't possibly be a reloading year. So by definition, this has to be a rebuilding year for the Georgia Bulldogs. Now, does that mean that when they rebuild, because of the way they've recruited, that they're going to fall off to 7 or 8 wins? I think not. I think not because of the culture, the program. I like to refer to it as the superstructure in Athens. I don't think that's what's on the table for Georgia here. Going back and looking at that schedule and where the wins might come and where the losses may be, I don't know. I just don't see 6 wins, 7 wins, 8 wins. I don't see that in the cards. Now, admittedly, a lot of this has to do with whether or not Kirby Smart, Coach Bobo, can figure it out at quarterback with Gunnar Stockton. If it is him, Are they going to put him in position to make the kind of plays that he's capable of making with the new weapons that they brought in through the NIL and recruiting classes, the transfer portal and recruiting classes? Do they have enough playmakers there now to make this offense look more like what we think it should look like? 35 to 40 points a game. Is that what we're going to see? Is that offensive line going to be able to do its part, hold their water, and do a good enough job to help Gunner or Ryan or whoever it is carrying the rock? Are they going to get it done to the point where Georgia can be effective and stay on the field and move the change for drive after drive after drive? I don't know. That's why I have to call it a rebuilding year. But see, Georgia fans, this is how we know life is good. This is how we know that what we are seeing in Athens is special. I can talk all day about how young this team is, how inexperienced they are, how not deep they are going into the season, as far as guys that can play winning football, as Kirby Smart likes to say. I can talk about that all I want to, and yet I can still look you right in the eye and tell you that this may be a rebuilding year, but there is still a very good chance that this Georgia team is going to win 10 games and that they're still going to make the college football playoff. Those two ideas, if you're a Georgia fan, can both be in your head at the same time. The fun part, or the agonizing part, depending on how you view the world, is going to be how it plays out on the field, because we are all going to get to learn the answer to those questions together. Can the coaching staff evaluate and develop these young players and get them out on the field so they can help us right now? Who is going to step up and make plays for Georgia that we don't know about? Because that's going to happen too. That's why we watch. That's why when we say we bleed red and black, that's exactly what it means. We care. If we didn't care, the program wouldn't be as good. The football team wouldn't be as good. It just wouldn't be the same. So it's on us, Georgia fans. We are the reason it matters. I think we can go into 2025 looking and feeling good about this Georgia Bulldogs team, even in what I'm calling a rebuilding year under Kirby Smart. Heading into 2025, I think the Georgia Bulldogs are entering into a rebuilding year. I know, blasphemy under a Kirby Smart coach team in Athens. But as I just went through and laid out for you, I don't think you can honestly look at another Georgia Bulldog fan and say, this is not a rebuilding year, this is a reloading year. I don't see it that way. Unless you can point to Jalen Walker coming into Athens on the defensive side of the ball this year for the Dawgs, unless you can point to one of those young players that we haven't seen play yet and tell me that that's the next Jalen Carter, unless you can do something like that for me, I have to just be honest and tell you, I think this is a rebuilding year. But again, that doesn't mean it has to be a bad year. I think that the talent level on staff or on the field in Athens, I think the staff in the football building there for the Georgia Bulldogs, I think the superstructure of the number one program in college football is going to be enough, along with who I think is going to be a playmaker in Gunner Stockton at the quarterback position, along with a young man who loves the University of Georgia in Nate Frazier at the running back position, along with the new weapons that have been added to the wide receiver room over there in Athens. I think all these pieces are going to come together, and they're going to be guided by Kirby Smart and his coaching staff to the point to where they can keep Georgia right in the hunt for another college football playoff berth here in 2025. Go Dogs!
Told him, how about them fucking dogs? That's what I told him.